So yeah, thank you everyone for coming along to this session today on UX writing basics and making your content accessible with the lovely Laura Parker. So I'm so excited to have Laura on because she's a real pro when it comes to all things making content simple and accessible. And not only she's a content designer for government in her spare time, she also is a UX writing freelancer and is studying a master's in UX as well. So she knows her stuff when it comes to this topic. So I will hand over to Laura in a second, and how the format will work. She's going to give a presentation covering different bits, which I'll let her explain. And after every section, she will answer any questions that you have. So feel free to pop those in the Zoom chat, or you should have an option to do an audio message as well. So feel free to do either of those. So that is enough from me. I will pass over to Laura.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to, hopefully this works and you can see everything. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Let me just get used to this. Okay. My video seems to have gone off, I think. Or can you still see me?
We can see you well, and we can see your slides, don't worry.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Yeah, so as Christina just described, I'm a content designer at HMRC. Prior to that, well, I guess you could say as well, I'm a UX writer. I will go into how I became a UX writer later on in the presentation, but I just thought it'd be nice to kind of cover it off here as well. Yeah, so I'm a UX writer and I work with app developments in the government to create accessible services, including games as well. And as Christina said, I'm doing a master's in UX design. She did call me a pro. I didn't quite say I'm a pro, but I am trying, and I'm learning as I go. So the things I'm going to talk about today are very much things that I've learned on the way, and hopefully you'll get some inspiration and some help through these slides as well. If you want, you can at me on Twitter. It's Laura Parker UX, but I'm also on the Slack channel. So if you'd like to drop me a message after this, or if you've got any questions, just you can pop them on there as well. That's fine. Okay, so here's kind of what I want to explore today with you guys. So take a look at who our users are first of all, why accessibility matters, how to test your work, which is vital, and again, as I mentioned, just how I got into UX writing in the first place. And then I've just put a slide together of some resources that have helped me along the way. I don't suppose anyone could tell me what this figure might mean. You can use the chat box or you can shout out on your microphone. Either way. Any ideas, anyone? Okay, it's tough. This is what's called the purple pound in the UK. So 249 billion is the purple pound, and the purple pound refers to the spending power of disabled households in the UK. And it's basically the amount of money that people can't spend with businesses because they're inaccessible. For example, if I think one of the biggest problems is in retail shopping online. So the retail websites aren't accessible for people with certain impairments and disabilities, and therefore they can't actually purchase through their website. So it's very important for businesses that they make their services accessible. 249 billion is a huge figure. And as I say here, very few businesses have strategies to tap into this customer market. It's kind of like you can, by making your services and content accessible, you can increase your market share because you're basically allowing people with disabilities and impairments to use your content. And as I've said here, if you make your service accessible, the better experience it's going to be for everyone and the more market share you can reach. So it really is kind of important that businesses understand accessibility, understand that they have a duty to make all their content accessible so that everyone has a fair chance to interact with content. And we are Purple. We are purple.org.uk. Really great resource you should check out. They're an organisation that kind of works with businesses and help them and helps businesses to make their content accessible. And they've got some figures here, which is, you know, really kind of quite astounding. So 1 in 5 working adults have a disability. 75% of disabled people and their families have walked away because of poor customer service or accessibility issues from businesses. The top ones being, I think, public transport, banking is very difficult for accessibility as well, and as I said before, retail. They did a survey in 2016 and 4 million people in the UK found barriers, and they're estimated. There's this thing called the click away pound, which is basically when a user fails to use a service or product online because it's inaccessible and they have to come off, or they go elsewhere and spend their money there. That's called the click away pound, and in last year it was worth about 17.1 billion in the UK. So from a business perspective, it pays to be an accessibility advocate and to make sure your content is accessible. And this is really great. This is great information if you want to get buy-in. Sometimes there's this, I don't know, this idea that we're not all disabled or we don't all have impairments and therefore we don't need to make our content accessible. Well, given this information here, there's clearly a massive market share. There's clearly a lot of people, 1 in 5 working adults with a disability. That's a lot of people. And that's like turning away. It's almost like owning a shop and turning away every 5th customer, just closing the door on them and saying, you're not allowed in here. So it's really important for businesses. It can increase your market share, and it's good for population as well. It's good for everybody. Working with people with impairments and disabilities, what they say to me often is that they don't want special treatment. They don't want to have things designed specifically for them. They just want to be part of everything else. They want accessibility, and they want access to things like me or you might want access to. It's just that they can't. So I just wanted to open with this first of all to kind of get you in the thought process of why disability and accessibility is very important. Some of the ways that content creators kind of make things inaccessible, not by obviously on purpose, but these are the kind of top 6 things that I see quite often. Just to kind of pick out a few of these then, labeling hyperlinks as click here. There's 2 problems in this. The first one is that if somebody's using a screen reader, imagine a blank screen, and the way that technology works, assisted technology, is they're probably using like a readout, so they're listening to the content instead of reading it, and it'll just say hyperlink, click here. There's no real context to that. And secondly, it doesn't really tell a user what's going to happen when they click. So what we do in government is we don't say click here, we hyperlink the sentence. So if the sentence is, there's an example here, instead of saying to learn more, click here, you actually hyperlink, check out our latest blog post on website usability. So by adding context to the link, to the hyperlink text, it helps people who are using screen readers and such. And it just helps general people. Like I went through, a few days ago, I went through all my emails and tried to unsubscribe from emails I didn't really want to get. And all their emails were click here to unsubscribe. And it was really annoying because it would always take me to a different process. So I'd either have to sign in. Sometimes it was just as basic as clicking a button. But if you can put that in the hyperlink text, it's really useful. What have I got here? Using capital letters is quite hard to read. This is I'm not going to pick on this company, but this is a really good example of how using capital letters is just very hard to read and just not very nice to look at. When we first learn to read when we're young, we learn by looking at the shapes of words in lowercase. So you can spot a C, you can see a G, and we take that with us into being an adult as well, which is why we can very easily scan text, because we know what certain words look like. So by having all caps, it's very hard to scan and it's very hard to read. You have to really concentrate on what they're actually saying in this example. And the color scheme again is very, very, very abrasive. And if you have sight blindness, or if you have a visual impairment, which means you're colorblind, it's going to be very, very difficult to see the text on this screen. I'm just going to talk about one more because we've got quite a lot to go through. The last one here is unhelpful error messages. So if you've ever written a form, for example, or a validation error message for a form, you might have seen this example here. So fields highlighted below have errors. I mean, that doesn't really say anything to me. It doesn't give me any context about what error I've made or whether it's an error with the company. And also it relies on me knowing the color red. Red and green are used quite often in content. Red to highlight bad, green to highlight good. But if you are colorblind, red and green are the hardest colors to see. So it's really hypocritical in a way. And don't rely on color to suggest something. If you are involved in any kind of form creation, make sure you're not just relying on the color to make people aware of an error, and make sure you're using descriptive language. Tell the user what they've done. Tell them if they've entered an email in incorrect format. Tell them how they can correct their errors. Don't just say there's an error, because that's really frustrating. Any questions at this point about what I've just gone through?
I had a question about with capital letters.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on if you have like a title of a blog post and you capitalize every word, just the first letter of each word? Is that a problem as well?
So that's called I think it's called title case. So you would have every word, every letter of the word is a capital. So that's title case. In government, we don't do that. We do sentence case. So we often just do the first word capital letter and the rest sentence case, just because it's helpful. If you look at how I've got this on the content, the words on my slide here. If I was to capitalize the M, the C, and the B, it does actually slow down your cognitive load, and your cognitive load is what another term for thinking time. So the idea in government is that what you want to do is speed up the person's cognitive load, which means creating content that's easy to scan. So it's not the end of the world. Like if all your title, if your whole title was in capitals, that might be quite difficult. Someone with like autism, for example, might struggle with capital letters. Same with dyslexia. People with dyslexia, what's really helpful for them is to see the shape of the word. So if you are blocking out, because caps is all kind of one size, it's very, very difficult for those users to kind of get what you're saying. But I wouldn't worry too much about title case, really.
Thank you. Interesting to know.
No problem. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll move on to user empathy then. So we've talked a little bit about who's looking at our content and some of the mistakes we're making. User empathy is basically trying to put yourselves in everyone's shoes, so the people who are using your content. You might often get the argument that not everyone has a disability or impairment, but what I always say is that you can have an impairment. It doesn't have to be one that you have permanently. So I've put a few examples here. Location. If you're in a noisy cafe, you could be in a sunny area. If the sun's glaring your screen, that's actually making you impaired in some way. If you've got slow Wi-Fi, you might be tired, recovering from an operation, or have a broken arm. The equipment you're using when you're reading content, if you create something that looks really rubbish on mobile, and the majority of your users are using mobile, it's not a very good user experience for them. So the user empathy is not just thinking about people with permanent disabilities, it's about thinking about where your users are in different situations, so location, health-wise, and what equipment they're using. we need more empathy in our work to create content that everyone finds accessible. If, for example, you're at a bus stop, for example, it's raining outside and you're checking when your next bus is, you want something quick. You don't want to have to read reams of text to find out when your next bus is due. You want to just keep updating and have like a live tracker. That's a really good example of someone who's not disabled and doesn't have an impairment, but by using plain English and using accessible content, it actually helps that user as well. Just a quick case study on empathy then. Does anyone know of OXO Good Grips? I think they sell them in the UK. They're basically a utilities company based in America, and they manufacture utensils and cooking equipment and that kind of thing. And all their equipment have like really easy to hold handles. And the reason is because the owner, Sam Farber, was cooking with his wife Betsy, who had mild arthritis. And when they were cooking together, he saw her, she was really struggling to use old-fashioned metal peelers. And because of her arthritis, it meant that the grip handle was really small. She really struggled. So he had the idea to create a company where they would create kitchen utensils which were arthritic friendly, so people with arthritis, people who are elderly as well, who struggle with using their hands and things like that, can use these cooking equipment, and it's really beneficial for them. So it's a really nice story. He created the brand, he created the product, and now they're kind of like widely recognized. And on their website they have this story about how it happened and how Betsy is really proud of her husband. It's quite sweet. But also things like zoom in and out is a functionality that was used for accessibility, which we all use today. We all use the zoom in and out function. Subtitles again are another one, and video captions are all. These are all things that were created to help people with disabilities and impairments, but we actually all use them. So by creating content that's good for accessibility and people with impairments, it actually helps everybody, to consume your content. I'd really suggest you have a look at these posters, and I've linked everything here today on the slides. These were created by the Home Office digital team, and it's basically a list of do's and don'ts for designing for people with different disabilities and impairments. We've got here as an example, designing for users on the autistic spectrum, designing for users with physical or motor disabilities, like the example I just spoke about, the Betsy with her arthritis. It made it very difficult for her to hold certain things. In that context, then, if someone has a motor impairment, it's quite hard for them to move a mouse around. So make sure when you're designing that things aren't all over the place, and make sure things are captured in certain areas, so someone who is struggling to use a mouse doesn't have to go clicking here, there and everywhere to get content. So there's about 6 of these in the pack. Again, go download them, print them out and use them, and they're really great. Some things to mention on here, for designing for users on the autistic spectrum, don't use figures of speech, idioms or metaphors, because someone can take them literally. It's quite interesting how some of the things that we actually have to take out of our content in government, because someone might think a joke is literal. So just be cautious about what you're actually writing and the types of audience who are consuming your content, and the types of language and context that you put around things, because not everybody is able-bodied. So go check these out, they're great. Give them 5 minutes, give yourself 5 minutes to go over them, because they are really beneficial. As with the last slide, I think you should download this Design for Everybody poster. There's you can download it as a PDF, but also a Word document and other things as well. The Design for Everybody poster was developed by government, and we use this all the time. And each section has specifics for people who are in different scenarios, I would say. So the two I've pulled out here are people who find it hard to understand. So there's like little check boxes here. So use plain English, keep sentences short to the point, don't have long paragraphs, and avoid abbreviations. And if someone's in a distracting situation, make sure users can pause moving content like carousels or videos. So if, for example, you've got a mum of two and she's looking at something on her phone and she's distracted by her children, she can come back to something and doesn't miss out. Yeah, so go have a look at this poster, download it, and give it a thorough read because it will be really helpful for you. The last part of this section I want to touch on is writing for specialists. So sometimes I get pushback from some of the developers I work with on using plain English, and they might say to me something like, oh, well, this term is widely used in the industry, or you're dumbing down the content too much. But in reality, when we researched this, even though people can understand complex language, they actually often prefer to read something that's simple. And the reason being is that people with the greatest expertise tend to have the most to read. So you have somebody who's a specialist in any area, and they're quite a busy person, and they often have a lot of academic things to read or whatever. I think it's really important that, you know, if they want to go order a takeaway on Just Eat, they don't want to have to think about it much. They want to just pick some food and order it because their brains are already full of information. So actually that argument where it doesn't really stand true, in a sense that we found anyway, as some people might disagree and might think that, you know, they enjoy reading jargon and everything like that. But whenever you're writing for specialists, just remember that you're not really dumbing down content by writing in plain English. You're kind of being helpful for them. And anything that's easy to scan as well is a really good shout. You know how I said earlier, we actually often learn words by the look of them. That's because that's a really good, our brains basically remember the shapes of words, which means we can drop about 30% of text and still understand. If someone gave you a paragraph of 100 words and they removed 30% of them, you could probably still understand the context behind the word, behind that paragraph. So if you make sure you're using simple words which are easy to scan, you can really help these people to get to what they want to do. Another useful tool is to think about how a user feels in the moment. So you're sat here months away from Christmas, and you might be creating Christmas content, and you can only know how it feels to be you right now, and you're writing whatever it might be. But in the moment when someone's actually consuming your content, they're going to feel a lot differently to how you felt when you wrote it. So this is a really kind of rough chart, but you could really expand this in your company, especially if you have like a tone of voice document as well. So have a look at how the user feels in certain environments. If, for example, I am using a banking app, I might be a little bit more tense than if I was shopping on Amazon. So there's different things that people do. There's different connotations that certain businesses have. If, for example, I am feeling annoyed or frustrated, I've just received an email saying that my account might have been, someone's changed my password. I need to get to that solution right away, and the language then needs to be clear and serious and straightforward. It doesn't really want to be funny or punny or, have a look and think about how your user is feeling in that particular moment, and then change your tone of voice to match that. As examples here, for example, angry, frustrated, stressed, the copy needs to be clear. And then here's an example of when people might feel in that way. Error messages, as I alluded to in the very beginning. If I'm trying to enter a form to pay for something and I keep getting this red message which just says error, and I'm like, I just want to pay for the damn thing, and I don't know what's going on, I don't know how to correct my mistake, that's going to make me very frustrated. So then the language needs to be clear, and you need to tell the user exactly what mistake they're making. On the opposite scale here, if someone's happy, relaxed, you might want to go with a success message or a marketing message. So if, for example, you've just purchased something, you get a thank you email, you could do some really nice copy with that, because you know that they're in a kind of mood. They've just bought something, they're kind of, you can unless they've bought something really horrible, you can assume that they might be feeling happy about their purchase. So think about how people are feeling in the moment, and adjust your tone of voice and the types of content you create for that particular scenario. Questions again? Do we have any questions about what I've just covered? No, that's fine. I just want to cover this thing you might not have heard before. It's called minimal viable content. And basically, minimal viable content means the least amount of content a user needs to complete a task. You might hear people say, oh, we'll just add more text, or we'll just add more a description. But when there's a problem, or if somebody's not understanding something, it's very tempting to create more language around it, to describe the error or give more context. But in reality, what you're doing is the more words you add to a page, the more people have to think, which is their cognitive load. For every 100 words, our thinking time increases about 11%. So we will really want to think about, okay, so where's the balance between getting the context right and making sure that we're not over complicating things. So there's this concept of minimal viable content, which is using the least amount of content a user needs to complete a task. Good UX writing and content design means you remove words and only keep the ones that are helpful. Adding more words or pictures means adding more information, which is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to give a user just the right amount of content that they need to do the job they're trying to do. Case study about this. I don't work in this service, but there's the Prove Your Right to Work to an Employer service. And previously to this screenshot here, a user had to log on to the Gov UK site, generate a code. They would have to go through a series of forms, so they would fill in information about themselves and past employers and that kind of thing, and they would get given a code that they would then have to pass on to their employer to prove their right to work. But when we did some user testing, it occurred to us that a lot of people didn't really know how to use this code. So I would go onto the Gov site and I would get this code, but I would be like, well, I'm not sure what I do with it now. So instead of adding more words to describe, because it would have been really easy to tell the user, okay, you need to take this code to your employer and then your employer has to do X, Y, Z. What we did was we changed the service. Instead of having to go through the kind of all the forms and get the code, now all you have to do is you put the email of your employer in there and we send the code straight to them. So instead of going through and adding more content, we basically revised the service. So I guess a good example might be if you've got a validation form on your site, or if you're using a landing page and you're finding that people don't quite know how to contact you, you might be tempted to write more words. Instead of doing that, maybe just think about the flow and the journey of everything, and maybe you could come up with a different idea that's not adding more words, because more words means more thinking time, basically. So that's the minimal viable content idea. Any kind of comments on that, on the MVC, sorry, before I move on? Great, cool. I'm just going to touch on how you can test your work now using prototypes. For some of you, a prototype might be a really strange thing that you've never done before, but it doesn't matter whether you work in any industry. A prototype is a really useful tool that you can do. And it's basically a sample version of a final product. So what if you're creating a landing page, or you could be creating an app or a website? What you might do is struggle to look at a blank page. You might look at a blank page and think, oh my God, what am I going to do? Why don't you do a paper prototype? So the goal is to test a product or product ideas before spending lots of time on them. and it can help solve certain things like usability issues, and it can reveal areas of improvement. Paper prototyping is really quick. You literally just need a pen and paper, or you can do it using different software, and it really is just a sketch or scamp or wireframe, however you want to call it, of your content idea. Basically, websites are just pages with blocks on them, and you can use prototyping to sell an idea to a client, to get feedback, and it's really easy to do. This is a quick example of how something goes from a paper prototype to a real life vision. And I think a lot of people are afraid of drawing because at one point in their life they might have been told by a teacher that they were really bad at drawing, but reality, you don't need to be able to draw. You just need to be able to conceptualize your idea on paper. We're quite visual people as humans, so if you're trying to sell or get buy-in from your boss or whatever, and you've got an idea, I guarantee that you'll get more traction if you draw it. If you just draw a flow or draw how you envision it might look like, it can really help that person to visualize what you're trying to achieve. So that's tip one. Try paper prototyping. It's really useful. Another really quick thing you can do is called the highlighter test. So if you've written a piece of content, print it out. I know it's quite hard to do that during COVID times, but if you have someone, even your family member or a partner, give them 2 highlighters, give them a red and a green highlighter, and get them to highlight green where they understand what you mean and red where they don't. And for the user, it's really simple. They're just reading a piece of content. I understand that, I'm going to highlight that in green. I'm not quite sure, I'm going to highlight it in red. And once you keep doing things like this, you'll be able to see the spots or the types of language you're using that's not quite coming across in the way that you'd like. So this is a really, really, really easy and really cheap way of getting user feedback. And like I said, you don't even have to send it to a colleague. You could get your mum, your dad, your sister, your grand to do it, and in some ways it's better. So the person who has less knowledge of what you're trying to do is a better user. So give that a try, that'd be great. I'm just going to recap on some of the things I've discussed here. So the next time you sit down to write or create in any way that you do, start with a purpose. So design your content to take into account the fact that lots of people won't read the content in detail, and they probably aren't paying 100% attention to your content. If, for example, I'm right-handed, if I break my arm, touch wood that I don't, and I have to use my phone in my left hand, that's going to be quite tricky for me. And so I really, really would struggle to read reams of text. Quite frankly, I'd want content which is simple, easy to use, intuitive, that kind of thing. So just try and imagine all the scenarios that your user might be going through. Stress can really change how we interpret information, and it's a very stressful time for everybody at the minute. So that's a really good reason why you should make sure that your content is written in a really easy format for people to recognize, especially if you are your service or content provider or business is to do with people accessing your services at point of need. So if you're the NHS, for example, the way they write their content is very much give me the information I need right now, because chances are I'm reading that information and I'm in a panic or I'm stressed out. Empathize with your users. So what else might they be doing? As I've just said, think about your tone. So is your tone of voice right for the type of things that your user is doing? Think back to those error messages. I don't really want someone to tell me a joke or a pun if I'm trying to complete an action like a form. Consider accessibility needs. There's a link here to words to use and avoid when writing about disabilities. And again, using plain language should help your content be clear to everybody. That's people with impairments, people who don't have English as their first language as well. It's really helpful for people like that. Okay, Going on to the last bit of my presentation now. Do we have any questions up to now from anyone?
I just had a question, and when you were talking about the doing prototypes, because that can be a more persuasive way to
Yeah.
tell the bosses how to do something. Do you have any tools that you recommend for designing prototypes?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I seem to have gone. How do I go back? Hold on a second. Let me just, I've gone forward there. Okay. Yeah, so pen and paper is what I use.
Mm-hmm.
You can use things like, have you heard of Miro before?
Yes, I've heard of that one.
Miro have a wireframing, I guess you call them like drag and drop boxes. You can use that. You can use Sketch or Figma or XD if you've got any access to those technologies. Post-it notes are really great as well. If you've got a wall, just get loads of post-it notes and draw one thing on a note, because the idea is you don't want to make your prototype too static. Because what if you take it to someone and they just say they hate it or they want to change it? You're going to have to go back and redo it. So the idea of a prototype is you fail early. You fail earlier on in the creation. So you don't go from like an idea to a fully fledged website without any user feedback. Because if you did that and someone came along and said, we need this, that, and the other changing, you'd have to go straight back to the beginning. So the idea of a prototype is that you fail early and you spot mistakes quickly. And then once you've done your prototype and you've agreed as a group or whoever's involved in the project, you can then take that to design, and then you'll save time and money, and you also won't have to iterate as much because you've had that initial design kind of agreed on. But yeah, pen and paper is my bet. I use pen and paper all the time, and there's Miro, as I've just mentioned, which is free. Sketch, Figma, XD. You can even use Word, draw boxes on Word if you wanted. Like, yeah, so many ways.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really useful, especially about the point of making it flexible so you can keep changing it. And
Yeah.
thanks. John's also recommended balsamic.cloud as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there's probably loads. I mean, you could just Google prototypes in Google and it'll spit out loads at you. But I think the reason why I like paper prototyping the most is because it's to do with thinking time. So the idea of prototyping is just to get your thoughts on paper straight away. So there's nothing better than kind of scribbling on a piece of paper. And then you might want to, what I typically do in government is start with a paper prototype, get feedback on it, and then start to make those prototypes come alive. So I might do a wireframe, for example, and then it'll progress into a design, an initial design, and then it kind of goes on from there. And it's really useful. I recommend everyone do it. I'll just cover off the last of my talk now. It's just how I kind of got into UX in the beginning. I've tried to define it. There's a lot of weeds surrounding the different types of job roles that you might have. So you've got traditional copywriting, content writing, you've got content design, UX writing, UX copywriting. It's just like a minefield of things. So I've tried to define it the best I can, and I've defined it as writing to inform or instruct, whereas you would get traditional copywriting or advertising, which is writing to persuade. I think UX writing is much more about informing people and instructing them and helping them to navigate a service or product. We use plain English to make information accessible, inclusive and easy to understand, and we need empathy and lots of it to make products and services human and relatable. I thought it might be helpful to talk about some of the things I did as a copywriter and some of the things I do now as a UX writer. A lot of people I've seen say they are similar, and I think it's really helpful to have a writing background if you're going into UX in any way. But here's the things I did as a copywriter. So I was involved in sales pitches, advertising concept, SEO, blog writing, tone of voice, branding, content calendars, and the average sentence length, which is really interesting, was about 20 words. And here's what I tend to do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm all about the prototyping and the storyboarding, planning the user journey and how it flows into the next part of the project. Wireframing, pair writing. Pair writing is really cool. This is another tactic that you can do if you know another writer. Pair writing is just pairing up. You can pair it with a technical expert, you can pair it with a developer, pair it with another writer. The idea is to share knowledge and edit together. So you might use Google Docs and you might get onto Zoom or Hangouts or whatever and just pair together and go through it. Two eyes better than one. And rapid ideation is coming up with ideas really quickly through a process of different steps, which usually involves prototyping and storyboarding. I do tone of voice, which I did before. I do a lot more user research now, and my average sentence length is about 7 words. This was the best I could think of coming up with like a kind of then and now. I really hope it gives you a sense of the type of work that you do. I definitely do more technical things like coding a prototype in HTML and CSS. I never did that as a content marketer, but it is really helpful having a background in writing coming into UX writing, because the principles are really helpful to have, like basic principles like grammar, spelling, that persuasiveness actually is really helpful bringing it forward. It doesn't translate like for like, but it's very, very useful. So anyone who's in content role or copywriting role or whatever, you can transition to UX writing, and it's quite easy to do. You just have to self-learn if you're interested, or give yourself some fake companies, make up a fake company and make up a scenario and try and have a go at these like wireframes I'm talking about. So start with your paper prototyping, show the process of how it moves to a design and how you might test that prototype as well. So sorry, someone's just at the door. If you can hear background noises. I'm just going to finish off on this is a kind of like a timeline of what happened to me and how I got in here. So I started off in social media. I was doing things like community management and advocacy and content writing. And then I moved into more general content marketing, which is your traditional like blog and article writing, SEO, theme planning, that kind of thing. Then I became what you would call like an advertising copywriter. So I was doing more kind of billboard ads, sales and picture branding, and a lot more tone of voice. And then now I'm doing the UX writing / content design, because I really struggle to distinguish between these two. And that's, again, prototyping, coding, microcopy, user research, usability, and UX. I have put together some resources. There were literally hundreds of things I could have put on here, but these 2 books are my ultimate favourites. So that's Content Design by Sarah Richards, who coined the term, and the Design of Everyday Things by Donald Norman, who's an engineer. He was an engineer, became a psychologist, started talking about the way people use technology. It's really interesting and useful. Some websites I use pretty much every day as well, which is the Nielsen Norman Group, who Donald Norman is part of. They do lots of research into UX studies, so looking at psychology and behaviour of reading, that kind of thing. The Gov Design System. I don't know if I mentioned this, but when you work for government, you have to follow the design system, which is a toolkit of approved accessibility, content and design tactics, I would say. So you can go and have a look and browse at them yourself. They've all been tested. They're all accessibility okay, so go and have a look. And there's the readability guidelines as well, which covers certain things like grammar usage and things like that, and language comprehension for people with low literacy skills, which is another area that you should consider as well. There's this thing which is right for the reading age group of a 9-year-old. It doesn't mean that everyone should write like a 9-year-old. It just means that if you really want to get your point across, the best way to do it is write it as if you're talking to a 9-year-old. And that means that you explain it in the simplest terms, in plain English language, in a way that people can scan the content as well. That's kind of it for me. I hope you've really enjoyed it. I'm just going to kind of exit full screen and kind of take any questions if there are any. I can make these slides available as well. I can send a link out, Christina, when we're done, and you can send this out out to everybody. And I'm also on the Slack channel as well. So if anyone wants to come to me after this talk or wants to chat or whatever, just let me know.
Thank you, Laura. That was a super good snapshot into the whole world of content design and UX writing. You see, we got a question here from Helen. Oh, she said, I got my head bitten off when I mentioned writing for a 9-year-old recently. Apparently it is now disproved, but I'm glad to hear the government is still following that.
Yeah, I think I might know, Helen, what you're talking about here, because people tend to get the wording slightly mixed up. So the way that government says is write for as if you were trying to explain to a 9-year-old, not write as if you were a 9-year-old. It's like slightly different. And the reason it's 9-year at the kind of 9-year age group is because by the age of 9 you can understand about 50,000 words, and those words are all basic words that you use every day. So the idea is just using everyday language that a 9-year-old would be able to understand. But I understand there are some really heavy hitters in the content world which will just they were like, no, that's wrong. But just make sure it's easy to read. Honestly, that's all you have to do.
I had a question about making long form content as accessible as possible, because I know there are a lot of debates around should content be on PDF or horizontal, vertical. Do you have any thoughts on things like that?
I do, actually. So you might have heard this as well. PDFs, you can make them accessible, but it's very hard because a PDF, when you download it, often it doesn't expand to the desktop, so you have to zoom in and out, especially if you're using your phone. If you ever downloaded a PDF on your phone, it's horrendous. You kind of click into it, you have to move it around the screen. It doesn't fill the browser. So in any case that you can make it HTML or make it a web page, don't do PDFs. Because it's very difficult for a screen reader, particularly because a PDF is a photograph of content instead of it being the actual words of the thing. But I can send you some information about that as well. Long form content. There's nothing wrong with long form content, in my personal opinion. In some ways, it can be really interesting to read and really helpful. What you can do is separate it out into different headings, so making sure you're using subheadings, H1s, H2s, H3s, bullet points when you can. So taking a wall of text and making it accessible with me using subheadings, different titles. We use a sentence system, which is let me just remind myself of what it is. So one sentence shouldn't be more than 25 words. There shouldn't be more than 2 sentences in one paragraph, and there should be 1 point per sentence, which is the kind of thing we do. So there are things you can do to make long form content accessible. It's definitely not dead. Everyone keeps saying so email's dead, that's dead, social media is dead. No, you can make it accessible, definitely.
Thank you.
Right. Do we have anything else? Does anyone have? Let's see.
Any other questions from anybody? Yes, from John has posted a statement, not a question, but something .gov does well is a hyperlinked menu at the top of a page.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John. So if you're writing a long form content, you could do the same. Yeah, very good for SEO as well. I think because we might all be familiar with the F pattern scanning shape, where users read in an F shape. So they'll come onto a page, read the first line, read halfway through the second line, and usually scroll right to the bottom. So the reason why headings is quite good is as someone's scrolling to the bottom, they almost go through a process. If you can front load your headings with what the actual section's going to be about, then I can, in my mind, pick and choose which sections I read and which ones I can discard. Because we all probably know that people don't read word for word they kind of, like I said, they skip and scan and go all over the place. So using headers particularly, and the menu as John suggested at the top, especially if you make them clickable and it you know, what's it called? You can have like a hyperlink text at the top of the page, and it can bring you to that section within the content. That's really helpful and beneficial as well.
Yeah, definitely something people overlook, the headings, which really helps with reading, isn't it? Jump links is the technical term, apparently.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. Yeah. So Helen's got some interesting new research about reading patterns someone sent me. Oh, they're cool. Is it the saccade rhythm, Helen? Maybe it's that. That's basically how I think we skip the third letter. So we'll read words 1, 2, skip word 3, because we can guess what it means by the shape of it, which is like our eyes jump across the page. It's really interesting. Yeah, anything like that you can read. I always think like psychology and science are really great subjects to read about when it comes to content, because we all are human. We all read in different ways, and I find it really kind of interesting. So definitely look at like psychology of reading, look at how people read online versus reading a piece of paper as well. That's always something really good. Oh, F pattern has changed. Cool. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, because I imagine the traditional web page has changed slightly, especially on mobile where it's dynamic, where you can't really do the F pattern. Yeah, that's really interesting, Helen. I'll check that out. Thank you.
Brilliant. Do we have any final questions before we? Oh, it's a few minutes to 4. So any other final questions for Laura? Okay, I'll go.
That's cool. Okay.
Any final parting advice?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Advice, I would say.
What would be your number one thing that somebody could do with their content to make it more accessible? Like the most common mistake that you see in most content that you think?
Yeah, so I would say, what would it be? There are so many. I think it almost starts with empathy is probably the biggest way, because that will really inform how you actually write. But if you were looking at a writing technique, it would be to label your hyperlink text. So don't stop using click here. That's a really big one. And using like language how you would talk. We have this weird thing where we know what we sound like when we talk and the words we use, but for some reason when we write in this really strange academic way. And I think it's from school and things we've learned during our like academic careers. But using basic English language really does help everybody, people who are specialists, people who are young, people, you know, people who have certain impairments, as I've gone through today. Download those posters, they are great, and have a look at those and print them out, put them on your walls if you want, but they're really good.
Brilliant. Thank you for those final tips, Laura.
No worries. Thanks everyone, and I'm on Slack if you want to ask a question, or if you want to have another chat, that's fine.
Yeah, and we'll have this up in the members area as well, along with the slides and all the links that Laura mentioned. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. Bye everybody.
Bye everyone.
Bye.